You're listening to the Fresh Hell podcast. Fresh Hell contains stories of a disturbing and often graphic nature and is intended for a mature audience. Please don't let your kids listen to this, or they might turn out like us.
Hello and welcome back to Hell, Fresh Hell, your favorite international podcast. I'm Annie in America.
And I'm Johanna in Austria.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us. We very quickly and very importantly want to send our love to our Atlanta Hellions and those in the Asian and Asian American communities. We had a devastating act of white supremacist terrorism this week, and it's infuriating and incredibly sad, and we're thinking of you.
It is not so much on the news over here, but social media, it's all over the place, and I've been following it on all the social media outlets I'm on, so very sad.
We're thinking of you. Okay, happier news. What's next?
We'd like to thank our newest Patreon members, so these are Marisa Langner, Katie Uhl, Amy March, Leah Morgan, who, she's not new, she had just to rejoin because there was something off with her app and didn't work, but we figured it out, and Eva R. Thank you so much for supporting us.
Thank you so much. Now I'm wondering if Amy March is a pseudonym for a fan of Little Women.
I think Amy March is the one who made the stickers.
Oh!
Mm-hmm.
Those stickers are amazing. They're so fun.
Yeah, they're already on my laptop.
I need to order some. I feel weird ordering a sticker of myself, but I'm doing it.
Yes, but you support the artist, so I think that's fine.
That's exactly right. I'm going to give a bunch to my dad, and he'll say, "Who's this?"
That's what my mom said. And I just wanted to give my mom a Johanna sticker, and she said, I take an Annie one too. So
yeah, my dad would rather have one of you, I think, all things being equal. But thank you so much to all of our Patreons. We can't thank you enough. We hope you enjoyed our recent Necco wafer.
Yeah, we'll have a more detailed info about our Patreon and also a reminder for our current murder level patrons at the end of this episode. So if you're interested in our Patreon, please keep listening until the end. In the meantime, Annie is going to tell us the rest of the story of the Ketty Murders today.
Yes, I am. Also, no, I'm not. It's still very much an unsolved open investigation. And so while I know some people are not fans of all the details we give, in this case in particular, I think it's now going to help us be able to chat together about sort of the theories of the case and facts and what we think happened.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. Please be sure to listen to last week for all the info you need to really make sense of this. But here is a recap. Johanna, let me know if I'm forgetting anything. So Sue Sharp is a 36-year-old woman who has left her abusive husband and moved across the country with her 5 kids, ranging in age from 15 to 5. They are Johnny, Sheila, Tina, Ricky, and Greg. The 6 of them end up living in a small, cozy cabin that had once been part of the swanky Keddie resort, but was now low-income housing. It's in the woods, there are plenty of kids around, and Sue is working part-time at the Elks Lodge in the nearest town of Quincy, which is 7 miles or about 11 kilometers away. She's also taking classes at the local community college, and it seems like the young family who had gone through so much was finally making a fresh start. Then on Saturday, April 11th, 1981, their world would be forever shattered. That night, 15-year-old Johnny was out with his best friend, 17-year-old Dana Wingate. The boys were looking for a party and planned to stay at Johnny's in Keddie afterward. They were admonished not to hitchhike. 14-year-old Sheila was staying at her best friend's house next door at the Seabolts. At home that night was Sue, age 36, her daughter Tina, who was 12, and her sons Ricky, 10, and Greg, 5, as well as Ricky's friend Justin, who was 12. When Sheila comes home early the next morning, she opens the door to the family cabin because they never locked the doors in this community, and she was greeted with a scene from a horror movie. Her mother, older brother Johnny, and his friend Dana had been tied up and murdered. It was overkill, and they were stabbed and bludgeoned and strangled to death. A hammer and 2 knives were found at the scene. Also found were broken parts of a Daisy BB gun that was used to bludgeon Sue and perhaps the boys. There were lots of stab marks in the walls, and the phone was off the hook. The 3 boys, Greg and Ricky Sharp, and their friend Justin were unharmed and asleep, and initially claimed to have slept through the entire thing. Then Justin recounted a dream that sounded like a mix of what had happened in the crime and an episode of The Love Boat they'd watched that night. Shockingly, 12-year-old Tina was gone. The kid's father, who allegedly had both physically and sexually abused both of his daughters, was investigated and cleared. We also touched on the stepfather of Justin, Marty Smart. Justin was the friend sleeping over that night, and Marty and his best friend Bo, who was staying with him for a while. Bo was a fellow unemployed Vietnam vet with a history of violence that he had met while staying in the psychiatric unit of the local VA. Almost 3 years to the day after the murder, Tina's skull was found in the neighboring county, and initially they thought it was an old ancient burial, but received an anonymous 911 call suggesting that the skull belonged to Tina, and it was confirmed that it had. And so I think that takes us through to where we are now.
I think that's everything. Just the phone was off the hook. I don't remember that from last episode.
I snuck in. I mentioned a few things in the recap that I didn't mention last time, just so people wouldn't be completely bored by it. The Sharp family did have a phone, but the phone was off the hook. I think that's explained by the fact that the police involved all thought that this, you know how much we hate to see this we see it over and over again, but it seems like the killers were there for a while. They were,
They lingered.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So now we can start to talk theories a bit. We're going to get a little bit deeper into facts as we go. So I think maybe let's try to go from least complicated to most complicated.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. So the first one that I think we can immediately rule out is the kids did it. I don't even really want to mention it, but it's something that you read over and over again on forums, and I don't buy it really at all, not for a moment.
With kids, they mean the 3 little ones, and then the 3 little ones took Tina somewhere and murdered her there out in the woods. Like, how is that even a popular theory? It makes no sense.
Yeah, I really don't know. I kept reading about it, like proof that Tina was the killer, proof that Sheila was the killer, and I just didn't even open those things. It's terrible. One of them is like Tina met someone and wanted to run away. Sheila arranged it. It's just terrible, malicious speculation about children whose mother and brother and friend were murdered. So I don't like it at all. All right. The next one is a drug deal gone bad. So there were rumors that Sue was dealing drugs to supplement her income. There were no drugs found in the house, and there were no drugs found in Sue's system. I think this is another completely unfounded rumor. Equally, there was a rumor that Dana had possibly stolen some LSD, or that he had been involved with another drug deal of some kind, and this may have been retribution, but there's absolutely no evidence that Dana had anything to do with drugs either.
So this is such a weird theory, because I would get it if there was just the tiniest piece of evidence that somehow drugs were involved, or that one of them was involved with drugs somehow, or if the neighbors would have witnessed something like, something suspicious, strangers coming and going to cabin 28 at all hours of the day, or if the family would have lived above their financial means. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But if I understand you correctly, there was just absolutely nothing to support this, and this just comes out of thin air, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So they mention often in the interviews and like the older documentaries that the cabin, KeddyCabin28.com, their videos on YouTube. And so they've got all these really old interviews with people, not really old, but from like, I want to say 2003, 2004. And so they mention often in these programs that like, well, Coke was really big back then. There was a lot of hash around. But I'm like, yeah, so sorry, are you telling me that there was cocaine? Not in the 80s. Coke and hash? It was right near the Bay Area? Not in San Francisco. Not in 1981. Like,
yeah, it's like, duh.
I just don't think that's the smoking gun that a lot of people are like, well, whatever. It does seem like maybe Marty was doing some small-time drug dealing when he had a job at the hotel as a cook, but he had gotten fired from it. I'm not sure why. There could be so many reasons. But I think he was dealing drugs out of the hotel and then may have been, just the local hookup. But I still can't see that it's drug-related in any way. There's just no evidence of that. All right. The next one is Sue got involved with the wrong man. Sometimes people heard yelling, which It's funny when you read that because it's like, yeah, I bet they did. The cabins were pretty close together and she was a single mother of 5 children. I'd be worried if you never heard yelling. Do you know what I mean? It's like...
See, that's what I meant to ask you. I was thinking about the case, obviously, since last week. And so the cabins were so close together that the neighbors could hear the occasional yelling. Totally natural, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that night, nobody heard anything after what must have been going on in that cabin for hours. Nothing.
Yeah. I'm glad you asked that because I forgot to talk about it last week. So one neighbor did report, I think, hearing a single loud scream that night, but they couldn't really tell where it was coming from, and it didn't happen again. So they didn't really worry about it. You know what I mean? And if you live in a city, then that might sound like absolute madness. Like, how could you hear a loud scream and just not do anything about it? But if you live in the countryside, which these people were very much living in a national park in the woods, they could have just thought it was, forest-dwelling creatures making babies. Or like, if you've ever heard a fox, like, territorially scream, holy mother of God, that'll give you that cold sweat down your back feeling because it sounds like a woman screaming. So I can see that you would just easily dismiss that. And I think this was all heard around 1:30 that morning because we don't actually even know exactly when they died. It was sometime between Saturday the 11th and Sunday the 12th. There was another witness who reported hearing just a strange noise, but they couldn't figure out what the noise was, and they couldn't figure out where it was coming from. In hindsight, it was probably the victims being bludgeoned.
Yeah, I totally get that with living in the countryside and hearing things. Because since we moved here, we've heard so many animals that could be mistaken for humans. It's funny and scary at the same time often.
Oh, yeah. No, raccoons mating sound like someone's being murdered, like in your backyard.
Yeah, pheasants. Did you ever hear pheasants and the like screaming?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay, so about Susan getting involved with the wrong man. That's possible, and I would say that's not one of the totally out there theories because... happens, right?
Yeah.
Maybe even, now that I think about it, maybe she didn't get involved, but the problem was that she didn't get involved with somebody and that it was kind of a hurt ego murder.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're thinking what I'm thinking and what a lot of people are thinking.
Because also of the overkill, right?
And that's going to come up. I have that in my notes coming up as a theory, so we'll get more into that in a minute. So also there were rumors that Sue is supplementing her income with sex work. Again, no evidence of this. There were rumors about Sue dating a lot of men. No evidence of this. I think people are just mean, and I also think it's just that thing where if there's an explanation that you think is casting someone in a lower light, then you feel safer. Like, well, they were inside, It's that thing.
It was their own fault. Somehow they brought it onto themselves.
They brought it on themselves. Exactly.
I have the feeling that single mothers or divorced women often get this kind of things, especially back, in the 50s, 60s, 80s. I don't know how the 80s were in the US, in California, but here, definitely in the countryside. I remember one episode of Mad Men. So there's this divorced woman, Helen Bishop, I think was her name, and she gets pretty much dissed by all the suburban housewives because they think she's divorced, so she clearly has to be after all of their husbands, right?
Oh, yeah.
Also about her dating a lot of men, so that's just from my personal experience, what I see in my circle of friends and family. It's often the other way around, that single moms, especially the ones out of an abusive relationship, take it very slow to date, often don't introduce a new man to their children for a very long time, so meaning they often don't invite them over. This being said, it's none of anybody's business, I'd say. If she dated or didn't date, if there were a lot of men in her life, or if there were no men at all in her life, if she exchanged sex for money to keep her family afloat, this all seems very victim-blamey, yeah?
Yeah, I agree completely. It just makes me sad that she didn't get a happy ending in her life, And there's just no evidence of any of that. And Sheila, in an interview, she says that her mother, now remember, she was 14 when her mother was murdered, and she was a mature 14. Do you know what I mean? She'd survived things and been through things. She was not like a naive 14 by any stretch. And she says that her mother was home with them every night, and like they would have known if any of this was happening,
Even if grown-ups think they keep some secret from their kids, the kids usually sense what's going on. even at a younger age, you might not really know what it is all about, but later they often have this, oh, moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
yeah. I know exactly what you mean. One of the things that Sheila says about her family, and this is not a direct quote, but she says, we were poor, we were, living in poverty, but we always had love. There was a lot of love in our house. And I just think, I'd rather have that than the other way around.
Yeah.
The next theory is we know for a fact that even though they were told not to, several witnesses saw Dana and Johnny hitchhiking that night. So one theory is whoever picked them up was a very disturbed individual or individuals, and they killed everyone. I think this came from, my guess is that parents at the time were like, see what happens when you hitchhike? But I don't know. I know hitchhiking was popular then. Later on, the police were able to determine who the person was that had given the boys a ride, and they cleared her as a suspect.
That's good, because that was something that I had in my head since last week as well. I was thinking, what if it was whoever gave the boys a ride from that party, or somebody they met at the party, if they even found a party, because I remember you said they were looking for a party, but yeah.
Yeah, and they were looking for a party, and there's almost no information about whether or not they found a party. Most people think the reason for that is because they did find a party, and there was probably, like, beer and weed at the party, so they were all kids. Do you know what I mean? They were all,
nobody wanted to come forward.
Junior high and high school students, and it wasn't really germane to the case. Do you know what I mean? Except that maybe they would have been under the influence when they got home, but I don't know that that was the case. I know Sue was tested for drugs. I'm not sure about the kids, but it's a really common theory. And even though they've said they know who did it, they haven't told us they know who did it. And if it is all a police conspiracy, and I'm not saying that it was, that's kind of what you hear a lot with this case. How do you know? This is the most frustrating case, honest to God. Okay, let's move on to the next one. This is another one that I think is a possibility. So this theory says that Tina caught someone's eye and they came to kidnap her. Sue fought back and the boys walked in on everything happening. We can't be 100% sure when or how Tina was killed. There were not any marks on her bones to determine what might have happened, at least the bones that were recovered. Some were missing, and so it's possible that if they had recovered every single bone, maybe they would have shown, a nick from a knife wound or crushing victims on other body parts, but her skull was intact and didn't show any trauma. I don't really like to think too much about it, but based on what I've read, I think it's possible that Tina was alive for perhaps as long as a year after she was taken. And if that's the case, listen, I'm not going to get into the implications. We all know what those are, but that could very certainly have been a motive, I think.
Yeah, that could be a possible motive, because why take Tina? Really feels like this was an end goal, of the attack.
Yeah.
Of course, I could be wrong, and it was just a spur of the moment thing. They are there, torturing, murdering, Sue and the boys, and out walks Tina, and they decide to take her because, it's their chance to take a little girl.
Yeah. Yeah. It's possible. I always thought, why wouldn't, if they were going to kill her, well, it's not a good thought process, though, is it? Because any way you start to think about it, it's bad. Because it's like, well, if they just didn't have it in their hearts to kill her, well, they did eventually kill her. I don't think there's any chance that she, snuck out of the house and made it that far and eventually died of exposure or anything. I think she was definitely taken just because the evidence and the tape at the scene. I think also Tina was a particularly vulnerable child. Do you know what I mean? Another theory on why she was taken is that she may have been being sexually abused again. And, okay, there was also a rumor that she was pregnant. Now, by the time her remains were found, like I said, there wasn't enough there to tell if she had been pregnant, and it's speculation. I think it was a tip given by the same person that gave the boys a ride home, but we still don't know who that is, so I don't know why they would say that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's very confusing.
Yeah, it's so strange.
If she was pregnant, who do they think the father was? The creepy teacher guy? With the photos of her at home?
No, they thought it was Marty. Marty Smart. I don't think there's a lot of evidence to this except to say if you're an abusive piece of shit, people are going to think you do bad things.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, makes sense. But it still could be other people.
Oh,
if
absolutely.
that's even true.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. The next one is, was it a serial killer? So Henry Lee Lucas confessed, but they ruled him out.
Of course he confessed, because Henry Lee Lucas confessed to pretty much everything unsolved at that time.
It was his hobby. He's like long walks on the beach and confessing to unsolved murders. Asshole. Yeah. There were other killers active in, I think like Northern California in the 80s in terms of serial killers. There were a few out there. So it's possible. It's possible.
It is possible, but the MO seems so specific in this case. The medical tape, attacking a whole family with neighbors close by. I think there would have been something, some part of that connecting it to other murders, don't you think?
I do. Yeah, and I think that when the Bay Area investigators heard about this crime, they looked into it because they thought it might be part of the Golden State Killer case. But, because they heard, tied up, this kind of thing. But and then bludgeoned. But the MO in the end did not fit. And then I don't think there was anything specific enough that would link it to any other case. So one of the next theories is that it was, of course, Marty and Bo. And that would explain why Justin, who was good friends with Sue Sharp's son Ricky and sleeping over that night, was unharmed. We know that Bo was interested in Sue and she had turned him down. And it seems like Bo and Marty had been trying to get Marilyn to see if Sue would be interested in him. And she was just, again, good day, sir. No. But you do wonder about the validity of some of the rumors saying that as an abused woman who had finally gotten out of a really bad situation, Sue recognized what was going on with Marilyn and was counseling her to try to get her out of what she saw as a very similar situation to the relationship she'd just finally escaped from. And some people say that Marty found out that Sue was encouraging Marilyn to leave him, and that's what set him off, leading him to his first trip to the psych ward at the VA hospital, which is where he met Bo. We discussed that last week. I can absolutely see this as a motive. This, to me, makes a lot of sense as a motive.
Was Sue and her family, were they already living there before Marty left for the psych ward?
I think the first time.
Because what if he took Bo for that reason? You know what I mean? What if it was really like Sue told Marilyn that this is a toxic relationship, you should get out. Marty freaks out, tries to run them over with the car, goes to the psych ward, but has this plan of revenge. And then he meets this Bo fella. And that's the reason why he took him home.
That makes sense, Johanna. Oh, see, now. All right, so let me keep going with the rest of the story because I think what you're saying makes sense on a real... Because I've already said that I think... you'll hear me say it in a minute when I get to that part of my notes, but I sincerely think that Marty was a complete sociopath.
But you said they had an alibi, right?
Yes, so let's talk about that.
Okay.
Yeah, they had an alibi, and they passed a polygraph, and they left the state the next day after the murders. Doesn't look good. It's not great. And that's part of the whole police conspiracy thing. People say that the police were like, get out of town. You know what I mean? I don't. Again, rumors. I think you're getting out of town either way. So, Bo... he died in 1988, and Marty Smart, he died in 2006. Both died of natural causes, so even if they were responsible, there won't be any justice for them on this side. But let's talk about that alibi. All right, so last week I said that they had gone to the bar and people saw them there, but here are the full details because this is interesting. Sue turns down an invitation to join them, and by them I mean Marilyn and Marty Smart and Bo. Bo Boobiday. And so they went to Keddie's back door. I know. Well, it's Severin John Boobiday, and people call him Bo. And so they go to Keddie's back door, the dive bar, and they stay there until the music was apparently changed from country to rock and roll.
So you're trying to tell me that they were not a little bit country and a little bit rock and roll?
Oh, no. No. Marty is all country, and he's not fucking having it. And he gets into, like, a screaming match with the bartender because they've changed from country to rock and roll. So they make a big scene, and they all storm out, and they leave. And they get home around 11 p.m., and they walk there. Do you know what I mean? It's just like a little walk through the woods. This is all very close. They get home around 11, and then once they're home, they call the bar just to yell at the manager some more about how shitty he is for changing the music. These are very serious country music fans. Like, do not fuck around with them. And so I guess the owner of the bar is like, we're really sorry. We'll go ahead and put on this. Well, listen, this is a guy that everybody knows tries to run over people, right? So It's like, sorry, we'll switch it back. So then Marty and Bo are like, all right, come on, Marilyn, we're going back to the bar. And Marilyn's like, nope, just nopes out of it and fucks off to bed. She's like, have a good night. See you later. So the men, they head back to Keddie's back door. Again, very casual bar. Probably one would say a dive bar. I'm not dissing a dive bar. Shout out to Charlie's Kitchen in Harvard Square. It's sticky, but they walk there. But they've walked there in new outfits. They've changed and are now wearing 3-piece suits and sunglasses at night. I'm doing finger guns now. Like, hey. Yeah.
Okay, why would they change into suits to go back to the bar? And why am I picturing Ron Burgundy and Brian Fontana?
2 possibilities. Okay. 1, and I'm really playing devil's advocate all the time with Bo and Marty because everybody thinks that everything they've done is guilty. Shit makes them guilty, but I'm also wanting to play devil's advocate. Do you know what I mean? So 2 possibilities. Here's the good side. Sue turned Bo down, and so they were out looking to impress. I don't think ZZ Top's Sharp Dressed Man was out yet. I think it was a couple years away, but, they're just out looking to pick up some ladies because also Marty was known to not only abuse Marilyn and her children, but he cheated on her regularly.
Why am I not surprised?
Yeah. Is it It's shocking, isn't it? Really?
Yeah.
It's not. Who expects that sort of behavior from a gentleman like that? Or they dressed that way because they wanted to be really sure that everyone at the bar remembered them being there that night. For an alibi. And maybe to sell a little coke and hash. Who can say? Listen, I don't know.
Yeah, you have to dress for the job you want.
This is it. And, it makes sense. Now we're going to get more into Marty as a suspect, even more. And I'm going to make, the case for both, as I said. Especially for one last piece of evidence that so many people, like everything I've seen and read about this, thinks it's a smoking gun. But I think I've uncovered something that says it's not. All right, so they were questioned together. Marty and Bo were let go. Now, perhaps the most damning evidence against Marty is the fact that he allegedly confessed. A few days after the murder, he went back. He had left the state. I almost said he left the country. He didn't. He left the state. He was back in Reno, and he went back to that same VA hospital to talk to the therapist about his PTSD. Now, he'd first gone to see this therapist to possibly appease Marilyn after an instance of abuse, and I think what happened is he was like, please, I'm so sorry, it's my PTSD. And she was like, go and get help or this is over. Okay. So now the therapist says how at the time he questions Marty about his past and he was sort of surprised to hear that Marty thought he had PTSD because as they spoke, he had learned that Marty worked as a cook and was never near any combat or any action. I think he was I think he might have been where troops were first sort of arrived. Do you know what I mean? Before they got sent off into other places. So it was sort of the safest place to be, kind of. And that's where he worked as a cook. And so as the therapist is questioning him why he thinks he has PTSD, he tells the therapist that while he was never shot at or shelled or heard shells, he felt like he might be shelled at any time, and the fear is what caused the trauma. Okay, fair enough. I'm not, I still think he's using it.
Possible. It's absolutely possible, yes. I don't want these people with this kind of, yes, it's possible. But it in combination with his character, it makes me roll my eyes. You know what I mean?
I do. And I thought from the beginning he was using it as an excuse to abuse his wife, which does not mean that you can. There are plenty, I'm sure, veterans out there who never saw combat and experienced extreme trauma. It's not all trauma is, bullets and shelling. It's not how it works. But in an interview with Marty's therapist, so he's in this case, so this is the Keddie 28 doc. This is sort of the Bible for all facts, which is, again, problematic. So he's hidden, his identity is he's in shadow, and he's talking about the sessions that he has with Marty. Then he says that a few days after the murder, Marty comes to see him, and he confessed to the therapist that he killed Sue and the girl, but that he didn't have anything to do with the others. And the therapist is like, why did you kill the girl? Meaning Tina. And he says that he just couldn't have any witnesses. So then the therapist asks why he killed them, and he said that he blamed Sue for his wife wanting to leave him. The therapist then adds that all of this was said with a completely flat affect, just no emotion at all. And then he joked and bragged about how easy it was to beat the polygraph. If this is true, total sociopath. And now I am thinking what you just said about him meeting Marty that first time he was there might be right on the money. He might have found someone because Bo was rumored to have been a mafia hitman.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, because it's Chicago connection, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Mm. So the therapist goes on to tell Martin that he does his therapist thing, right? He says, listen, based on the last conversations that I've had with you, it seems like the sheriff is a really good friend of yours, and what you need to do is go and speak to the sheriff about what has happened, because if you don't do that, you're violating the trust of friendship that you have with that man. And Marty was like, you're absolutely right. I've seen the error of my ways. I'm going to go confess. No, he doesn't. He smirks and he says, I'll think about it. And he gets up to leave. And as he's walking toward the door, the therapist says, you were never afraid. You don't really have PTSD, do you? And he says, Marty looked at him with just those absolutely dead eyes and smiled and said, nope. So the therapist calls the police and asks to speak to someone working with the Keddie case. And he tells them everything that Marty had just confessed to him because, surprise, there's no confidentiality when you confess to murder. And the officer says, okay, and they'll be in touch, and that he never heard anything back.
And he never tried to inquire again?
No. And I think part of the reason he never tried to inquire again is, again, at that time, everybody was saying how the cops were in on it. If everybody's talking about how the sheriff covered up for Bo and helped them get out of town and all of this, and you call the police and say this guy's confessed, and then the police do nothing, how hard would you press it? I'm not sure I would. I'd be afraid they'd come for me if you believe those rumors. Do you know what I mean? That's what's so hard about this case. It's so rumory. So the next day, Martin comes back to the therapist, and he just pops in without an appointment. And he was able to see him immediately, probably on account of all the murder confessions. And Martin allegedly says that he's leaving, he's taken a job with a carnival, and he's going to be traveling. And he says he's just here to say goodbye. And the therapist says, did you end up talking to the sheriff like we discussed? And Marty says, I'm still thinking about it. And he left. And that was that. Marty left the state and was never questioned by police after that first interview. And that was it.
So many thoughts about that. First of all, it has some plot holes. If that would be a movie, there would be a lot of plot holes. Also, do you think the info by the therapist is trustworthy? Because if it's true, then wow, obviously. If that is true...
Well, yeah. And I think that if it's true, then I really like your theory about Martin planning this all from the get-go. I could see a scenario where the plan was only to kill Sue, and maybe the boys actually came up from downstairs.
Or they came from the party, or...
Yep.
Mm.
And that, the men might have had Sue tied up and gagged, and then when the boys came in, they just immediately hit them each with a hammer, just immediately incapacitating them. Or at least for a while. We know Dana fought to get out of his ties, but I don't know if it's the two of them working together, and they had an air rifle, which they may have had guns too. We don't know. It's not what they killed them with, but it's creepy, right? I should also mention that John Douglas, who is a well-known profiler, did do a profile on the killer or killers. I'm not going to bring it up at all because when I read it, I was like, this is weird. And then I found out that it was done extremely early in the case and he wasn't given all of the facts. So again, is it a cover-up or incompetency? Like, which is worse?
I love John Douglas.
I know. So they did find some other evidence. Over time, the original sheriff working the case, he claimed he never really knew Marty, although Marilyn claimed he was Marty's best friend, and I have no idea what to believe. The discovery of Tina's remains was probably the biggest break in the case, but it just led nowhere, and the case went cold again. In 2002, the surviving family held a memorial for Sue, Johnny, and Tina. In 2004, for a number of reasons, including looky-loos and ghost hunters, the cabin was demolished, but by that time, it had been redone and other families had lived there over the years. And eventually, the original sheriff retires, and there's a new sheriff. His name is Greg Hagwood, and he had never forgotten the case because he'd actually gone to school with the boys. He ends up hiring a private investigator by the name of Mike Gamberg, who is a retired police officer, and he also never forgot the case and also knew the victims. So now Gamberg's working the case, and he wades into the evidence room for the Ketty murders, and some of it was stored improperly, things that had been in like a fridge that of course broke and nobody noticed the fridge broke, so they lost a bunch of stuff.
So frustrating.
I know. It's incredibly frustrating, but he did make a discovery. He found an unopened evidence envelope that had never been entered into evidence at all. Neither, by the way, had any of the information that the therapist had given. So he finds a cassette tape, and on the cassette tape is the recorded 911 call that came in when they first found that skull. They thought it was the, ancient burial, and there was the 911 call letting them know that it belonged to Tina. They also find a letter from Marty and Reno to Marilyn and Keddie, and it's postmarked 16 days after the murder. She had left right after the murders, just like Marty and Bo, and never got the letter. Now, a lot of things I've seen and read over the years only read this one part of the letter, and they feel it's evidence of Marty confessing.
Do you think she was in on it, that she knew?
Yeah.
Because why did she leave so early? Why did she leave just after the murder?
Some people do think that Marilyn was complicit, or at least knew after the fact.
Yeah.
All right. So here's the part you hear most often, and what you'll hear is investigators found a letter that had never been read. The letter was tested. It did have Marty's DNA on it. And this is an excerpt from what was found in the letter. Quote, "I've paid the price of your love, and now that I have bought it with 4 people's lives, you tell me we are through. Great. What else do you want?" End quote.
Okay, I can see why that seems damning.
Right. It definitely seems like a confession. But if you remember last week, now part of the reason I ended up doing this in 2 sections and not one right immediately after was I was still trying to figure out if Marty had had a family before. And it turns out he had. So let me read you the entire letter and we can see what we all think once we've heard that, because boy, does this sound like some toxic relationship bullshit. And I think there are some people who think relationships are supposed to be crazy, passionate, angsty, and stormy. But in my personal experience, that's not healthy. It's not.
So much agreed there. Relationships should be easy and uplifting and safe because there's enough crap along the way that tests you and your partner anyway, so you don't need all that.
Exactly. Yes, that is what I always say to my friends who are in these, like, on again, off again, on again, off again.
No.
It's no, because that's life.
Is it exciting? Sure, but it's so draining and it's not healthy.
And life does that to you. Life is going to come at you constantly, and so you need someone who is your partner to get through all that shit with. All right. So here's the confession letter, and I'm the biggest air quotes ever. Quote, "Dear Marilyn, first off, you know that I haven't tried to hurt you with my letters. I'm writing this after our phone call Monday, 4/27. Marilyn, there's 2 things I want you to know. The first is that I love you and I don't care what has happened. Now is the time to start over. Call now." Sorry, the Call now, exclamation point. Just kind of. Is this when infomercials started? Was it in the 80s? Because now I feel like I have to say, but wait, there's more.
True.
All right.
There has to be a better way.
Right? Call now. And then, okay. Quote. Now back to him. Quote. You don't know how much I suffered before I met you. I asked God to send me someone who would care for me. I thought he sent you. I remember the hour, the words that were said. I said your phone number 1,000 times that night. Now, I'm not sure what that's all about.
Because he was too stupid to note it down. He had to walk home and remember that phone number. You know, like in that Will Smith movie, Pursuit of Happiness.
And it was a fucking rotary phone. So he'd get like 6 digits in, and right before the 6th digit, it would be the wrong one. And let's start all over again. That's probably what happened. It took him 4 hours to get the phone call placed right. All right. He goes on, quote, I've given you my heart, all of it. Please try and think back. What do you think I've paid for you? For 3 years, I've heard about your kids. Don't get me wrong. I love them too. The ones you tried to run over. Now I'll ask, exclamation point. What about mine? Don't you think I love them? Honey, I gave up 4 of the most precious things in my life for what? For you. The answer is simple. Now I'll ask you, why should I love your kids more than mine? I've tried. It's not a question mark. It's I've tried. It's an exclamation point. There's the punctuation in this is all sorts of wrong. That's more than you can say. I don't think you ever loved me, much less my kids, and yet you expect this from me, and I've given it to you. I've paid the price of your love, and now that I have bought it with 4 people's lives, you tell me we are through. Great. What else do you want? I've paid the price. I've given my flesh and blood for you. I'll gladly pay your bills. Just send them in. Yeah, that's the problem. You know that I love you more than my own kids. Can you say that?
Oh.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I know you have given up a lot to be with me, but I don't think you know what I've paid. Yes, I'm jealous. For the price I've paid, I should be. You can't seem to understand how bad you have hurt me. I'm crawling back. Take me. I've paid for your love. Please give it back at least once. If you don't, you know you've stolen my heart and given it to the street.
Wow.
Sorry, it keeps going. I love you. Think about what I've given up for you, Marty. Call me. Please don't wait till it's too late. I've given it all. What else do you want? Exclamation point. Also, he spells his name Marty, which is like M-A-R-D-E. Like, his name is Martin, and people call him Marty, and he spells his name M-A-R-D-E. But I think the line about 4 lives, which pretty much everything you see, it's presented as the smoking gun, I don't think it has anything to do with the victims. No. I think he's saying he abandoned his 4 kids for her, and it wasn't enough.
If you take it out of context, it's bad. It
right?
seems bad.
Yeah.
But you shouldn't take things out of context, because in context, in the whole letter, you know exactly what he means. You know exactly what he means.
Yeah, it's very clear. Now, some people have speculated, like we were just saying, that Marilyn was also involved. She made a lot of damning statements. And again, the Keddie 28 documentary. She makes so many really damning statements about Marty, but I'm not including them because the interviews were done years after the murders, and she's clearly very biased against him for her own reasons. Do you know what I mean?
Sure.
We're already discussing this in the Facebook group a little bit, so you can come there and we can chat. But I really do think that it makes me sad if any of Marty's biological children are listening to this with him saying, you know, I gave up my kids for you. I love you more than I love my kids. And I don't think that's true, actually. I don't think Martin was capable of love at all. I think he was a true sociopath.
It was narcissistic behavior.
Yeah. The only person he loved was himself.
He was trying to manipulate her.
Yeah. He wanted someone to care for him.
Yeah.
Care for him, take care of his needs. So I don't think it's it makes me sad to think of their dad, the kids of him listening to this and thinking, I mean, they already know he was a creep, but also I really don't think that he'd even have been capable of it at all. So this letter is sent to the Department of Justice, and they get a DNA match on it, and it is from Marty. Marilyn said she'd never seen the letter, but she did say it was his handwriting. The next development comes in 2016. A man is over in the Keddie area, and he's actually looking for a lost wedding ring that I think belonged to a friend of his. So he's out with his metal detector, and he's searching around in the area where the pond is in Keddie. And he gets a hit with his metal detector, but it's not a ring, it's a hammer with a blue grip. And he thinks it's junk, and so he just throws it back into the pond. It's not until later that he sees DMAC's website, the Ketty28.com, about the murders, and he calls the police. So he speaks to Special Investigator Gamberg, who goes and retrieves the hammer. They're able to find it again pretty quickly, and wow, does it look just like the hammer that Martin had said during his first police interview had gone missing. So the hammer and the tape are sent off in hopes that they can get some voice recognition from the tape and maybe some DNA also being able to help. More evidence is also sent in for DNA analysis. I think they sent in some of the tape that was around the victims that had taped them up, and I think they also found some small hairs, but I'm not sure who those belong to. Again, really hard to get perfect information. So those have been sent off for DNA, but we don't know. We haven't heard. In 2016, Sheriff Hagwood said, quote, "There are people locally who know more than they've said, and I believe we've identified some of them, and we know who they are, and we know where they are. And I have every confidence that they either participated after the fact or they have first-hand information. It's obviously a worthwhile pursuit. There is not an expiration date on homicides, and to the extent that we have surviving siblings and family members, it is our fundamental obligation to them to understand who did this and why." End quote. And that is it. And I don't think that we have any more info on the case. And I know that a lot of people say that it's a police cover-up. I don't think that's the case anymore. I think it's a shame that we don't have more existing evidence, more blood samples that were preserved. Maybe they do. Maybe this is the kind of thing that they're still working on and still running, because I do think that today with DNA, they could run the DNA, or at least look at blood typing and maybe be able to piece together the events in the order in which things happen. I feel like they did that on the Jeffrey McDonald case, didn't they? They looked at the layers of blood to figure out what had happened. So if we knew whose blood was on Sue's feet, for example, did she see her own son killed? Is it his blood? Is it hers? Tests like that I don't think were ever done. And there were a lot of defensive wounds on Sue's hands. So I can see two potential scenarios, which one was where Tina was the intended target and they fought back, which of course you would. And the other would be Sue being the target and the boys walk in on something happen. Now, I don't think that downstairs where Johnny lived and where his friend Dana, the two boys that were murdered, they were staying in that downstairs basement room. So it's also possible they heard something upstairs and came up. And my understanding is they didn't do any searching of the downstairs room. So like, for example, I think Dana was a diabetic and always carried insulin with him. So that room was never searched. Was his insulin in there? Had they come back and they were hanging out in the room? Then they heard something upstairs?
Is that where the drug rumors might come from? Like,
well, if they found that one needle?
No, if some nosy neighbors, for example, one time saw him with a syringe with his insulin and they didn't know what he was doing, you know?
It could be, absolutely. But it's frustrating because I don't think that they ever searched the room. I don't think we don't know where his stuff went or if it was there or not. Also, would somebody have taken it and used it to kill Tina or incapacitate her? I don't know.
But you would need a little bit of medical knowledge for that, right?
Yeah, you would, and I don't.
Which gets me back to the medical tape.
I know.
It's so odd. That was so odd for me.
It's a lot of medical tape. So Dana's sister thinks the boys walked in on something, but she actually believes it's random. She thinks it was just a random act of violence. She also said the police never spoke to them. Like, the police really didn't question her family at all.
She thinks a stranger just by accident stumbled across that cabin in particular and decided to raise hell in there.
I think so, yeah. I think that's what she thinks happens. I think if you live in that area, you're going to want to feel like that's what happened, right? Like, you're going to want to feel like it was just It
was random.
Yeah, right? There's a lot of information about Justin. There's a lot out there about what he saw. His story's changing a lot about him being hypnotized over and over again. As far as I can tell, now remember, Justin is one of the boys who was there that night and survived. The other two, who were the family members, they claim they never woke up, which I believe. But Justin wasn't sure and said he thought he might have seen something. But as far as I can tell, a lot of the hypnosis done on him happened weeks or months after the murders. So he would have seen and heard plenty around town about the murders, right? And I not only think that these hypnotherapy sessions would have been really useless, I think they probably traumatized this kid even more than he already was. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think you're right.
I think whatever Justin saw or didn't see, it's too late to know because...
It's all mixed up now.
Yeah, if they had had someone qualified to do that, I think maybe it would have been all right, but they didn't, and I really do feel like the police, I think their intentions were good, but I think they traumatized this kid in... unnecessary ways, and I don't think he knows what's true and what's not. You know, he was a kid. We've also had a lot of our friends in the Facebook group telling us crazy stories about things their kids have slept through, like trees falling into their bedrooms.
Yeah.
There's a lot of info out there that's going to tell you that this was all a big police cover-up. Why were the DOJ involved? Was it just because of Bo being a mob informant and a hitman? The other option people don't seem to mention is maybe they weren't covering things up. Maybe they were just really incompetent. Maybe they were just cops who were terrible at their jobs, but it has to be one or the other.
As far as I understood it, that was a very rural area, right? It's not it's close to San Francisco and the Bay Area, but it's very isolated, or... So it's an isolated area. Maybe the cops were, as you said, not bad cops, but maybe they were just... It was too much for them. That's not something they often have to deal with, this kind of crimes. And they
would. This is it. Completely unprepared for this kind of thing, right? It'd just be really hard for them to cope with otherwise.
Yeah.
There are... if you hear heavy breathing, it's because Opus just barged his way into the room. He's gone now. Paul's taking him out. There's 2 movies that are allegedly based on this case. One is called, I think, The Strangers. Have you seen it?
I would have never made that connection. I saw that movie, but I wouldn't,
That's what people say. There's nothing in common with it at all. Because it's like a family being, I don't even know what it's about. I briefly read the synopsis.
A couple is tortured by 3 or 4 strangers.
Yeah. But what happened with The Strangers is, and I should have looked up to see when it came out, I didn't, but it was compared to the Blair Witch Project. I don't know if it came out around the same time, or it must have been afterward. But what happened was that when people saw The Strangers, I think the beginning of The Strangers says it's inspired by a true story or something like that.
Mm-hmm,
So then people on the internet started searching, and then they came across the Ketty Murders. And that's when things really started to blow up in terms of people talking about the Ketty Murders. And some people actually believed that the Ketty Murders were all a fake. They didn't even believe that they were a real thing because they thought that the Strangers movie was doing like a marketing thing the way the Blair Witch did. That's
marketing,
all.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The other movie is called Cabin 28, and unless you've already watched it, please don't. If you have watched it, let me know. My understanding is that this one is actually a horror movie about the murders, which I think is in really poor taste. It's like reenacting the worst case scenario of what the murders were. I don't like this. It just feels like profiteering off people's pain. It's too soon.
I had never heard about that movie until I checked the DMAC. I was looking for that on YouTube, and this one showed up, Cabin 28, and I just saw the trailer, and I was like, okay, well, that seems off.
I didn't even watch the trailer. How was it? Just awful?
It's
yeah.
A run-of-the-mill average horror movie that's, jump scary. Yeah.
It's just, why can't you do that about just write a fake one? They're all the same. Just make up some names and copy another horror movie. You don't need to make it about people who still have loved ones alive who miss them and love them. It's a shitty move. Sorry. There's still a $5,000 reward for any information leading to an arrest and prosecution. Sheila is still working with police and is very vocal about wanting to keep this case in people's minds, which is the only reason I looked into covering it. And I haven't spoken at all about her younger brothers, which was intentional. They slept through everything and, unlike Sheila, saw nothing, so just no need to bring them into it. I hope so much for everyone in that family that they are able to get some closure and some justice someday. I really pray that they figure out, because the police have basically said that they have DNA matches, they think they know who's responsible, and some of the people are still alive. So if that's true, I just hope that's true. You know? It's so sad.
It's a very frustrating case.
It is. And I've never tried to research something quite like this in terms of their just, so in the Rebecca Zahow case, for example, right? That's another case where there was a lot of, because we still don't know definitively. I mean, I think the jury will always be out in terms of public opinion on Rebecca Zahow as to whether it was a suicide or whether it was a murder that was covered up by the police. But what ended up happening there was the police became extraordinarily transparent. And so you could find on the police website all kinds of information that was direct from, a little bit would be redacted, but for the most part, it was a reliable source. When we did Lindbergh, I was reading case files directly from the FBI's servers. For this one, I was reading in message boards.
Yeah.
There's so little information, and it was hard. But the main thing was in the things I watched and the things I read, I just had this building fury for the way these people were treated just because they were poor, and people assume the worst.
I think maybe not only because they were poor, but maybe also because they were outsiders. They were not originally from that area, and we know how these rural communities are.
Oh, yeah.
Very tight-knit and looking at everybody with a side eye who wasn't born there or whose family is not from there.
Oh, yeah, that's like growing up on the Cape. Yep.
Same here.
Very much so. Very much so. So that is where we stand right now with the Ketty Murders, and I wish I had better information for you. Come join the Facebook group and let me know, what did I forget? What should I have left in that I left out? Let's chat. We're curious to hear what y'all think happened. How about something good? Well, can you talk for a little while?
My something good. Today while we're recording, not today when you out there are listening to this, is my brother's birthday. He's 20 today. He's our baby brother.
Birthday.
So the funny thing is that my mom had kid every 11 years. So I was born 11 years later, my sister, and then 22 years later, after I was born, my brother. So she always had a teenager and a toddler in the house, which is crazy, in my opinion. But yeah, he's 20 now. He's big because he's really tall. He's tall. He's so tall. And he's such a great, lovely, nice young man. And it's an honor that he's my brother. That's my something good today. Happy birthday.
He seems absolutely lovely. I'm looking forward to meeting him. I want him to come over and stay and fix my wiring. At the beach cottage, though. No. Happy birthday.
What's your something good?
Oh, so when we were doing the NECA wafer taste test, I mentioned that we were going to watch some epically long director's cut of the Justice League film. And what it was is Zack Snyder's director's cut of the Justice League film. Wow. It's 4 hours and a bit long, but a completely different movie. Well, I guess what happened, and I don't know the full story, but the Justice League movie was, he had started it and then he didn't, what was released in the theater, I guess, was not as he intended.
Exactly.
And so watching the director's cut, it was a completely different film. They cut all the best parts. It was a really dark, beautiful film. Now Paul and I kind of want to go back and rewatch sort of the Justice League stuff because it's a little bit confusing in your head because you've seen parts of it, but then other parts you haven't, and all the characters have much bigger, broader backstories, and they completely cut the whole bit in Justice League about the town in Russia, and they're trying to save that family in Russia that's in the apartment. That's not even in there. That's not in there, but it's over 4 hours, and it was an absolute joy to watch. All right, let's wrap this up. We talked about the Facebook group, Patreon.
If you are interested in our Patreon, please go to patreon.com and search for Fresh Hell. We pop right up. Or go to our webpage, freshhellpodcast.com, and there you find all the links. Also to our merch, to our PO box, to our email, all the ways you can contact us, and to our Patreon. This week, Friday
the 26th, right?
Yes, Friday the 26th. I think we said 6 p.m. your time, right?
Mm-hmm.
We are gonna have the game night for our Murder Tier patrons. Don't forget, if you're Murder Tier Patreon and you have time, come online. We're gonna play Cards Against Humanity.
Yeah, that was fun last time.
In our Patreon, you will never find any of our usual episodes. Maybe just some early access ones if I get editing done sooner, and they're gonna be available 2 days early. But it's not like we're gonna put our usual episodes there, but it's fun. It's mostly us chatting, eating candy, unboxing things, talking about whatever you want us to talk.
Yeah, tell us what you want us to talk about. Do you need advice? Do you want cautionary tales?
I would so love to do that. Like, I would so love to give advice to people, especially relationship advice.
We would listen. We have logged some miles in the relationship category. So we'd probably be good at that.
Yeah, and that is our Patreon.
Yeah, ask on Patreon. Do you want to tell us some weird stories? Is there a topic you want us to discuss that doesn't have anything to do with murder, mystery, or the macabre?
Annie had actually a great idea. She wants us to watch a makeup tutorial together and try to recreate it with what we have on hand.
I was so high when I suggested this.
Which would be easier for me because I have tons of makeup, but it's gonna be fun to see what Annie comes up with.
Annie's gonna come up with pink eye. All of my makeup is very expired. That's all right. It's going to be fine. It's going to be good stuff. Thanks again for listening. Thanks for telling your friends about us. Thank you for leaving a review. Thank you.
Please tell your pets we said hi. Hug them, kiss them, cuddle them, treat them as kindly and as good as you can. Remember,
That's right.
They're going to be the ones to judge you once you cross over to the other side, so don't treat those
I was
pets
going to say, remember, they're the ones that'll choose your nursing home, but no. Nope. That's the nieces and nephews.
Yeah, tell them we love them. Tell them we miss them.
Yeah. And until next week, if you yourself are going through hell,
keep going. Tschüss.
Bye.